Great, thanks so much. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here today. I'm Mark Hines. I'm the Regional Sales Manager for ISSA Security. I'm based in the Cincinnati area. I cover the North Central, so I've got about 14 states. I've got Connor Mancone with me, joining me today. He'll be speaking in just a few minutes. So I don't know if any of you guys have heard about Achilles before. We were founded in 2018, and we've been GA for about 5.5 years now. So we're really starting to get things moving with the solution. And you can see there, we've got double-digit Fortune 500s now. We've got 4 of the Fortune 20s. You see some really large organizations that we work with here in the United States. We're also a global organization. We've got Deutsche Bank, banking customers over in Germany. So we are a cloud-native platform. We've got billions of transactions that we serve up each and every month. With many of these organizations, we're backed by some prominent investors, and Deutsche Bank is one of those. So we've got private equity firms, JVP, Nokia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're endorsed by most of the major firms such as Gartner, Forrester, Coppinger, IDC. We also partner with organizations like GuidePoint, and we also have a partnership with Thales. So Thales actually OEMs our secrets management solution under the hood. Their Cipher Trust Management. So this is the Achilles platform. You can see at the base of the foundation there is our fragmented cryptography. That's our patented technology that allows us to serve up third-party secrets as a unified SaaS platform. So we've got many different use cases in this platform. Our bread and butter is in the machine identity world under secrets management. So we also do PKI. We've got a full lifecycle management for certificate automation. And we've got a really hot use case right now called multi-vault governance. So we can actually pull multiple clouds into the Achilles solution and provide rotation in those various cloud vaults, provide dynamic just-in-time credentials at runtime. We also just announced just last week our AI agent identity security. That's our runtime authority. And it stems from a lot of our initial work was around machines. So it was a nice transition for us in the agentic AI world. We also have a modern PAM solution. So on the human side, we have an enterprise password manager, et cetera, et cetera. So again, a unified platform where you can do all of these use cases under one platform. Overlaying all that at the top there, you see our Achilles Identity and Secrets Intelligence. So you're able to do discovery of secrets. Right now with our multi-vault governance, you can go out and discover all the secrets in your various vaults. We also have certificate discovery as well. So we've got that nice control plane layer over the top. So again, appreciate you guys having us here today. We're also going to be hosting, just to mention, a happy hour at the Blind Squirrel. I think it's about 10 minutes from here, from 1:30 to about 3 or 3:30. If anyone would like to come out, obviously grab a beer, have some snacks. I think the Masters will probably be on this afternoon. So please come out if you're able to.
Yeah, let me add on that before you pivot over. So Mark is a good in Achilles in general, sponsoring ISSA against Central Indiana, in Cincinnati as well. So thank you, Mark, for sponsoring. Yeah, the happy hour, if anybody can come, stop by, come as you can. But thank you, Mark, for being a good sponsor and representatives. Those are the folks that really feed into this and let this work to give those discounts and those benefits. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing that, not just here, but ISSA across the.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brad. I do, and Achilles, say, Chicago, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, chapter. So really appreciate it. With that, I will hand it over to Connor, smart guy here, to tell you a little bit about the.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here and talking about this topic. So this was some fun I had, and for a past job, it was a red team exercise I ran. So I've spent a lot of time with a security engineer, mostly on the blue team side, but occasionally dipping my toe on something a little bit more hackery, which would be events like this. And so, yeah, this is the summary. It's easy to call. Sometimes it can be easy to think something is low risk, but before you dismiss the risk. You want to make sure you know what you're really dealing with is the summary. And so the rundown, it's okay if you can't read that because I'm going to give you the rundown of the rundown. It's really very simple. Just to give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about and what happened and what we were doing is we had some critical vulnerabilities coming through our bug bounty program. And, we talked to the owners about it and they were like, it's a low risk service. Who cares? It's fine. No big deal. And so, we went ahead after some discussion and I realized it was a good way to demonstrate some bigger changes we needed in the organization. And so we compromised their service, not to do anything with the service itself, but to use it as a basis to launch, in essence, a phishing campaign to compromise really just one employee credential, which we use to log into the company's source code management system. And really, I think this one is very relevant because, as I'm sure you all have to know, theft of source code is becoming more and more common. We just had Anthropic, they just had all of their Claude source code leaked just the other day. Hackers love to go straight for source code. Once they go for source code, they go straight for credentials in code, which you're not supposed to do either, but they always are. And that's what we did. And so we ended up gaining administrative access to about a dozen AWS accounts, including ones used for order management, and a whole lot of, just an unending treasure trove of credentials that we didn't even have time to touch. But for an attacker, we're just giving them persistence in the organization for who knows how long, and all starting from one of those low risk services. So you got to make sure you know what you know before you make a decision. So this is how it started. I would work with the bug bounty program often. Sometimes I'd help with managing incoming reports and stuff. And one day we just had a bunch of reports come in, kind of just like this. There were subdomains kind of under obviously related services under a subdomain of our organization. It was like, again, P1, critical, SQL injection, authentication bypass. And there was this P5 mixed in for an exposed Git folder. And this is pretty much what all it looked like. And so, you have all of this show up in one day and you're like, this is going to be one of those days, right? and indeed, there was obviously, this was the beginning of a long thing. And although the funny part is, out of all of those, as you will see, the most dangerous one ended up being the P5. That was really the one that we relied upon the most to make all of this fun sort of stuff happen. So again, it's not always as simple and clear cut as your typical kind of technical risk calculations. So we got these vulnerabilities come in. They're obviously related services. They're owned by the same team. And so, I'm a very code-oriented person, so I decided to go actually look at this code, inside, I had code access. And there was a few things I realized. One was all of these services were using more or less a copy of the same basic code base. Somebody had kind of made their own sort of quasi-framework, and they had copied and pasted it for all of these sites. There was actually like a half dozen of them. And the trouble was that whoever built this just didn't know anything about application security. And then that's an unfortunate reality sometimes these days. It's not necessarily uncommon. The code implicitly trusted every input from the end user. And again, this was I didn't say this, so not again, but this was a service connected to the public internet. And so in essence, it was vulnerable to everything possible. Anytime there was an SQL query using input, it was vulnerable to SQL injection. Every time there was input going into, a CLI call, an OS execution statement, which happened, there was an RCE. And so it was literally just vulnerable to everything. And I forgot to say, just for a little bit of just giving the talk context, I can talk a little bit fast. Please feel free to jump in at any point in time. I'm happy to answer questions, any comments, just to throw them out there, shoot up a hand, shout out. You won't hurt my feelings, okay? All right. So anyway, so it quickly became clear that this was kind of a disaster. It was a disaster. They had been using this system for like 4 or 5 years. They had kind of hired somebody who wrote it all and had been in place for a while. They'd been using it successfully. It was actually used by the marketing team. So I don't know exactly how it fit into the pieces, but I think what they used it for was managing images for like Google Ads and stuff like that. So, and so this is what they said, like, so this is how the negotiation with the team started. It was like, hey, like this is a little bit of a disaster, you know. You've had it for a few years, it's worked well for you, like, you know, you probably don't want to make any changes, but like you got your time and your money out of it. So, you know, managing images for marketing, that feels like something that you can probably find, you know, some third-party service where you don't have to have all the risk yourself. Like maybe it's time to start migrating to something new so you can retire all of this. Because this is, you know, pretty dangerous. And the answer was, well, you know, it's a low-risk service, right? There's no customer data. You know, we're very zero trust, which in this case just meant that, you know, it's in its own AWS account. It has its own isolated network. It's not connected to production systems. It's only used by our employees anyway. So like, what's the worst that could really happen? Was kind of the response. Although I think I would still push back about that a little bit. Even if there's no customer data involved, you know, if somebody broke into a site managing like our Google ad images, I feel like that could go pretty badly, even if it's not the most likely thing. But anyway, they were like, no, we're good. And so we pushed back a little bit more, like, oh, if it's only employees, you know, how about we like, which this is not normally by default, but like, I don't know, stick it in an internal network, put it behind a VPN, you know, I mean, it's not our favorite because VPNs get breached just as well, right? That concept of it's in the network, so it's secure is not usually my favorite idea, but you know, in this case, let's put a little bit of security in front of it. And the answer was, yeah, you know, we'll just fix the reported vulnerabilities and then we'll be good. And so it was a little sad. I mean, there are ways to push back against this, but it was definitely like, come on, like, yeah, anyway. And so there, you know, we do, as, you know, a part of the security team, there are certainly ways we can push back. This was one of our subsidiaries, so it wasn't necessarily something that I had direct control over, but we had a good relationship with their security team. But I realized, and I'll show you why I connected this to something I had been trying to push in the organization for a while, which was making sure that code especially doesn't have lots of leaked security credentials in it. Because as I mentioned, people love stealing code and using exposed access credentials. So it kind of occurred to me that this might be a fun time to teach by example, right? So it's like, you think this is low risk? Let's see, is this really low risk, right? And I mean, you guys already know how this ends, but anyway. And so I sold my management on it. And the basis of it really was this exposed Git folder, okay? And actually, this was one of the ones that was reported, so they went and fixed this. And I still don't know what happened, but after they fixed it, it didn't actually get fixed, which again, worked out well for me because I relied upon it for this exercise. So, those who are not familiar, so anytime you are using Git and you do like a Git clone operation, it makes a hidden folder inside of that clone directory. That's the .git folder, which is where it keeps a copy of all of the related Git information. Okay, and so it always has a file in there called config, where it stores some metadata about, you know, where the Git server lives, some basic configuration stuff. Sometimes there can be credentials in that, but not usually. So that's just how Git manages itself. And so with an exposed Git folder, what happens is, you know, when you're building your build for production, you accidentally keep that Git folder in there so it gets copied up to the server. And then if you also have your server misconfigured so that it will just return any files that exist on the server, then all of a sudden people can actually access that Git folder. So that's what I have going on up here, where this is what it looked like, where you could curl the service domain /.git/config, again, standard name in the Git ecosystem, and it would hand you back the contents of this file. And one of the parts of the configuration was a link to where that repository lived inside of the remote Git's, you know, SCM server, which in this case it was GitLab. All right. And it was clearly GitLab for the entire company. Okay, so you could go there because it's GitLab. It's a public SaaS. So you could go connect to that URL, and what you hit is an SSO login page. It's protected by SSO. But the nice part was this internal employee-facing service was also protected by SSO, and it was the same SSO. So if I can get a username and password that somebody uses to log into this vulnerable service, I can potentially go use that to log into GitLab, where the entire company keeps its code, right? The other nice part about the exposed Git folder is there's some pretty simple tools you can use that will actually let you download the whole Git repository straight off of the server. So you can literally clone the repo straight from the server. And then you get to look at the code. And if you have an application that's widely vulnerable to everything, all of a sudden you don't have to go, do your penetration testing to find vulnerabilities. You can just look at the code and find an RCE. So the plan, and again, I'll summarize quickly, was clone this site, clone the actual code itself, find an RCE, take over the service, use it to launch a phishing attack against the people who log in, steal some credentials, which was slightly complicated because they use MFA everywhere. So it wasn't just a matter of steal their credentials. We also had to do, MFA intercept, which is very possible these days, to take over an account and then go and log into GitLab and see what we can find. Right. So that was our goal. And so I want to emphasize, so again, the thought from this team was like, hey, this is low risk. There's no customer data. What's the big deal? But the kind of like the resource that we're abusing here is really their trust, right? When you use somebody's own service to launch a phishing exercise, you're using like their trust of their service against them. And I think it's easy to underestimate how important that can be sometimes. Because, and I'll emphasize this later, like every social engineering attack relies on trust, that the person thinks they're talking to the right person. And again, social engineering attacks, super common. This is kind of like a very subtle, a high level social engineering attack. And so we are abusing their trust. And again, like that's more than anything else, like the technical vulnerabilities aside, being able to use their trust for their own service was, I think, we'll see. That was the thing that really made it successful. So yeah, long story short, it was successful. And again, I think it was really only successful because we did this from their service. So yeah, we cloned the source code. It was very easy to find RCE. It was very easy to exploit. We didn't do all the normal things of like trying to figure out, what do they have in their cloud account or what other network resources are nearby, because we already knew what we wanted to target, which was GitLab. We didn't do any of that stuff. And so we modified their application to track the users logging into it. So we would get things like, because it was SSO, we would get title, we would get name, we would get their IP address because we're doing this from the server itself. So we knew where they lived. Not surprisingly, they were all in India. And so after we had done some reconnaissance, we flipped it to like, okay, we made an exact duplicate of their SSO landing page so we could harvest their credentials. And then in real time, we would take those credentials, log into their MFA provider, and try to add in a second MFA device that we control, right? And of course, this would trigger, you'd have to approve that via MFA, so it would send them a push notification. But again, keep in mind, they're trying to log into their site. So they're expecting a push notification. After they put in their password on our fake login page, we gave them the typical MFA like, oh, please accept the push notification on your phone. And so we figured like, it'll show up and they'll accept it, no big deal because they trust it, right? And it didn't go as cleanly as I hoped, although we did succeed. So we set it up to try one attempt a day, right? Because they were in India. We had to, it was while we were sleeping. So again, the thing was fully automated. And so we set it up so that once it redirected somebody into our malicious flow, it wouldn't do that again until we reset it. Because if something went wrong, we didn't want them to be able to go back and like, oh wait, that looks really suspicious. And so the first person showed up and didn't put in their password, they just left. And so our guess is that they were using a password manager. And so it wouldn't fill in because it was the wrong domain, right? That's what password managers are for. Second person, same thing. Didn't provide their password. And then we saw in our logs on their server, all of the engineers coming to log in, right? And so I think, which we hadn't actually seen, we originally were trying to target the engineers, hoping to have GitLab access, but they stopped showing up because obviously this wasn't their day job. And now all of a sudden, like every single engineer on the team logged in, and it's like, oh, my suspicion is somebody's like, gosh, the website is doing something really weird. Like, I don't know, my password manager wasn't working. I don't know what's going on. And so probably everybody showed up to try to figure out what's going on. But of course, we set it up so that nothing would happen, right, for the people who come back. So they didn't see anything. Again, why would they question their service, right? Trust, that's what we're really taking advantage of here. And I'm sure they had no reason to go really digging. The only way they would have found something is that they actually looked at the code on the server, which, let's be honest, nobody does. And so they just, could couldn't reproduce it. Everything's fine. I don't know what to tell you. So we had a little bit of a conversation after that second one, like, all right, what do we do next? Like, obviously they were using password managers. Like, I don't know if we can get past that. And finally, we're just like, might as well just try it again. And that third time, it succeeded. The person had just a simple, easy password, so that I don't think they were using a password manager. Came to our malicious page, filled out the username and password. They got a push notification. They accepted it, and so we are just in. Simple as that. So we have employee credentials. I might have done a little dance in my living room. It was fun times. I really didn't know if it was going to work, honestly, which is sometimes why you do these things. So what's next? Okay, yeah, pivot. Honestly, at this point in time, it's really straightforward because we just took those. Again, I'm not going to read all of this, but it's very simple. We took those credentials, we logged into GitLab, and we were in. This is not uncommon. They obviously had it set up so that if you have a company email address, you just get read access to GitLab, right? Because that's nice and low privilege, read access, no big deal. But we did what everybody else did, which is search for the credentials and code. We got read access to about 6,000 repositories. I already knew what we wanted. I was looking for personal access tokens for GitLab itself. And you can actually use the GitLab search to search for those. So I didn't even have to go clone repositories. We found about 100 access tokens. 6 of them, that's it, were still valid. So in terms of managing and rotating access credentials, they were doing pretty good, but they missed 6 out of 100, okay? And that gave us access to about 200, administrator access to 200 repos. One of those had read access to a sister company, also in GitLab. So now we had access to that sister company. It was about 7,000 repositories. Do the same thing again. We ended up with a personal access token for a DevOps admin for a whole department. And so now we've got write access to about 2,000 repositories. So now we're getting really, really sensitive stuff. While we're there, again, actually these first few steps were fully automated. We stole every single pipeline variable we had access to in all of those 2,200 repositories. So we ended up with about, 3,500 miscellaneous secrets. Like, this was a big treasure trove that we didn't do anything with, but an attacker would have had, lots of fun. So like there was API keys for financial institutions. There was communication channels with customers. There were cloud credentials galore. Like, I don't know, again, I don't know what might have been able to done with those. I'm sure there would have been a lot of fun. Really bad for the company, but we just didn't have time to do everything. So the very last thing we did was we did spend some time and manually clone some repositories looking for ones that had automatic deployments. And so, CI/CD pipelines to deploy to AWS automatically. And we found a bunch that we thought we would be able to abuse. Made some malicious commits to take advantage of those chains of trust between the SCM and AWS to create administrative roles in AWS that we could use. And so we ended up with administrator access to about a dozen AWS accounts, now in 2 of their companies for a wide variety of purposes, including customer order data. And so, yeah, it's... I guess so the last one, just to say, and a very important question is, okay, but what traces did we leave behind? And so, this is actually a little bit of a purple team exercise. We've been collaborating with the SOC behind the scenes, and that was one of the questions, like, hey, if somebody were to actually do this, what would, how would we find out, and where would we be able to stop them in this process? And the unfortunate answer is, we did not raise a single red flag through the whole process, which is really not what you want. And part of it was at the beginning, again, being relatively smart, right? We didn't go do network scanning and things like that, which are the kind of things that get you, because we wanted to go into GitLab. And so we didn't, they had EDR, but when we were abusing the RCE, we didn't do anything to trigger it. And we weren't trying very hard to avoid it. We just were doing very specific tasks because we knew what we wanted. During the account takeover, we didn't have any troubles there. because, like I mentioned, since we were launching this working from the server side, we had home IP addresses from where these people were working. And so it was all automated anyway. The automation we used to like log into that account and add an MFA device, we just deployed that to the same continent the employees were working on. And so we didn't trigger any alerts about like, unexpected travel or things like that. And then finally, oh yeah, this one really surprised me. We stole all those pipeline variables. I would have thought that triggered an alert because we were monitoring our SCM solutions. It turns out for GitLab, and I believe also GitHub, the read operations on pipeline variables, they don't trigger, that doesn't create a log in their audits. So you can go and steal all of somebody's pipeline variables and there won't be a single log in their auditing system. So that's kind of unfortunate. And so there's literally no record of us doing any of this, including stealing thousands and thousands of credentials. And really, honestly, like it makes this a kind of a worst case scenario for a business like this. I think about the attack. So many breaches are related to stolen access credentials. And the one I always think of is Okta, right? It started with stolen credentials that led to more stolen credentials, and then they compromised Cloudflare. In Cloudflare, when the attackers got into the Cloudflare environment, they rotated like thousands of access credentials to try to get the attacker out. And they missed some, right? And they didn't get them all. And so the attackers ended up back in their infrastructure again. And then they're like, now we just need to we're going to rotate every single access credential in the entire company is the mandate that they put down. And like, how do you do that? Like, honestly, how do you do that? But this is the kind of example where you can see this. When you've got this, the struggle with stolen credentials is, how would you trace something like this back? Especially when we've stolen pipeline variables and there's no record of it. If you don't just go and rotate everything, you can have people inside of your infrastructure just making use of those credentials for who knows how long. You don't know what credential they have, so all of a sudden they can pop up anywhere. Like it's really a worst case scenario. Obviously, it's nice, therefore, that it was us doing this and not an actual attacker, because this can be really bad for. So it was fun times. I did learn a lot from this. Even myself and the team and I who are running this, we learned things like again, social engineering is all about abusing trust. And so don't underestimate the power of trust and letting somebody take advantage of that. Password managers and MFA, I think those are kind of the standards today, but I think we're kind of reaching a point in time where it's time to move on to more MFA phishing resistant technologies like passwordless or like FIDO, those UV. You can't phish those. I'm not, this seemed a little bit new to me at the time, like, hey, let's steal their MFA, get them to accept an MFA thing too. But it's actually, I'm by no means the first person to do that, and those kinds of attacks are becoming more common. So it's something to be aware of. If you're not using password managers and MFA, I'm excited to say you're definitely behind the time. But even those, it's time to start planning for the next wave of protecting user accounts. Again, yeah, attackers, they're targeting source code. Again, we see a ton of examples of this. I swear the Microsoft Windows code base gets leaked once every 2 or 3 years. And their answer now these days is just, the security of Microsoft isn't based on the security of our code base, so whatever. And honestly, that's like the answer it should be. If you all have source code, it's probably going to be stolen, and you need to be able to just be like, that's fine, take it, have fun, whatever, we'll be fine. Like that needs to be your answer. And if it's not, you're going to have something like this happen. Pipeline/secret variables. I hate them now. There's no auditing. There's poor access control. There's no support. Honestly, they might say it's a place to put state secrets. Don't put secrets there. Like that's really all there is to it. Anytime I'm working with pipeline variables, I'll have configuration information like how to connect to my AWS account or my secret manager, and then I'll go fetch secrets from there where I know things are being audited and where things are being rotated. I'm not going to stick actual secrets inside pipeline variables. That's me. High privilege users, and high privilege access credentials, they definitely need extra care. Again, so much of this came down to that one access token for a DevOps admin who had administrator access to thousands of repos. If you have that very privileged access, you need to be very careful with your access tokens. Like that's the one you really need to have a plan for sure, if nothing else. And finally, as always, the principle of least privileges reigns supreme. So there's a lot of ways where a better application of the principle of least privileges might have saved this one from happening, but it didn't. You know what? And yeah, most importantly, if you don't manage your credentials will manage you. And so I'll just leave it on this slide because it's fun. But the idea is very simple. Again, I actually use this to start our push for searching for leaked credentials inside of our code repositories and stuff like that to get those things under control. That's becoming a very common use case. We have people ask us about that all the time at Achilles, and it's probably something that most companies need. But the thing to keep in mind is every leaked access or like every access credential that's somewhere it shouldn't be means that it's a failure in secrets management in the first place. So finding them after they leaked is nice. But what's best is to have a good strategy for managing them in the first place. You know, once everybody knows, like, hey, this is how we properly manage access credentials, it makes it a lot less common for them to get stuck in the wrong place, which gives you less cleanup work. All right, that's all I got. So, questions?
Yeah, real question. I know you talked about like the negotiation phase. Like I see that a lot where people are like, it's not as serious. And then there's a whole push toward, like CTEM and like understanding the risk, but there's still a lot of that going on. And
Yeah.
it happens in my neighborhood when they're like, I'm gonna leave my car unlocked, it's safe. And then boom. What strategies have you seen that have worked to really help people set those priorities correctly? Because that was a good point, but
You can't do that every time.
what
Yeah.
have you seen?
Yeah, no, I think, a lot of it is, it helps to have a decent culture of general security awareness in the first place. So you all can talk, kind of talk a similar language and, hopefully help bring these lessons home in the first place. At the end of the day, I think that kind of thing is always going to happen. Like you're going to have these cases where you're like, I don't really think that's a reasonable risk for the business to accept. And you're going to have other people say, you know what, I accept the risk anyway. I know a lot of companies try to deal with that, which probably makes sense of like having someone who actually officially signs off on and accepts the risk and kind of in a sense puts their name on the line. That wouldn't necessarily be my favorite because I don't know if I would want to put my name on the line for these sorts of things, but just have an official risk acceptance concept. That way people understand like, hey, if this goes bad, like this is on me for making this decision. I think helps people think that through a little bit more. But there are also those cases where like, you can't necessarily like risk acceptance is a part of the job, right? You can't go fix every single security thing. So you have to have some ability to like, I don't know, I don't think I'm answering your question, but like, other than the fact that there needs to be some way to, really decide like, is this really a risk we're willing to accept it or not? I think being able to coherently explain like, okay, these are the risks, these are the worst things that can happen, is definitely a big part of that. But even still, there's going to be this. It's just the nature of the beast.
Did the corporation they have a regular program for evaluating SaaS solutions?
You mean like for company owned ones?
Actually, like pen testing.
Yeah. We
regularly.
had. I mean, I was part of the application security team. We didn't go off and pen test everything, which is why this got picked up by Bug Bounty. Although, like I said, it's been in production for 4 or 5 years, so it's obviously been sitting there for a while with nobody realizing what was going on. But we had all the usual application security things like SaaS tooling to try to find vulnerabilities by looking at the code itself. But even that missed this for a variety of reasons. So it's unfortunate how easy it is for some of these things to kind of slide under the radar for a long time. Yeah. So we did, but it still took us 4 or 5 years to find out. This did finally convince the company, though, that we should start, investing in what is actually hiding in terms of just credentials inside of our code base and how do we start fixing those. Although, again, you have that usual issue of like, okay, what does that mean in practice? Let's go find a tool that's going to go find these things for us. And now at this point in time, we've got just one more tool that's got thousands of findings that are all critical on top of the other half dozen tools that are doing the same thing between SAST and SCA and CSPM and I don't know, whatever you want to call this tooling. Actually, if I talk about that too much, it'll probably sound depressing, but like that is always the struggle is like, we've got all these different security things that we have to do, which one's the top priorities. It's a tricky problem.
Did they have a development environment and production environment where they use different IDs?
Yeah, in this case, no. It was a very microservices like focused company. And so everybody, that's what it really came down to, is everybody ran independent services, which is why they had their own AWS account and MVP. And so some teams would have different environments, some teams like this one didn't. I think that was part of the problem is, it's just for the marketing team. There was nobody here who was really an engineer, right? This was like those engineers who, showed up to look at things. Like that wasn't like working on this site wasn't their full-time job or their primary responsibility. And so I think that was one of the things that came out of it. Like if you're going to own a service, you need to make sure you have some dedicated engineering people who can understand that service, have some knowledge about security and maintain that service. So we don't have this thing that's been out there for years that is just, a bomb waiting to go off.
Our marketing team had that same issue. We had to shut down a bunch of, they were doing like customer surveys and collecting data.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's leaked out and it's like, you guys, we told you to shut this down. What's going on?
Yeah.
And come to find out, they had stored data from other surveys they had done. It wasn't the fresh stuff, it was old stuff. And again, they just chose to put it in that location.
Yeah.
So it's crazy what marketing.
It's the marketing people, right? Marketing, sales, hopefully sales.
Always a problem.
Happens.
Absolutely, yeah. I readily admit it, yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, it's the reality that and even engineers make these kinds of mistakes all the time. I mean, it does. It hurts if you don't really have an engineer involved who has a good idea of what they're doing. Although I guess they would have told you that the person who wrote this was a long-term engineer who knew exactly what was doing. And sometimes that's not the case too. I've talked to engineers who got a decade of experience and who just don't know anything about application security. Like it's a problem, right? That's just a reality of it. We got those silos in our education systems. And it's just part of life because you can't know anything, right? You can go and get an engineering degree and just not learn anything about security or operations. So it's honestly, I sometimes am amazed things work as well as they do.
Obscure.
Anybody who's been in the industry long enough has that same exact feeling.
Still works.
So yeah, that's why we do credential management among other things. And so anyway, this is why I work here. So, any more questions?
Any other questions or anything?
Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for attending. Don't forget about the happy hour. That is